through, I'm sure he'll be here in time for the scoping meeting. So let's start with a roll call.
Chair Alchek is momentarily delayed. Commissioner Gardius?
Present.
Commissioner Lowing?
Present.
Commissioner Monk? Present. Commissioner Rosenblum?
Present.
Commissioner Suma? Present. And Vice Chair Waldfogel?
Present. Great. Do we have any oral communications cards? This is just general oral communications, not for an agenda item?
Okay. Right.
Okay, great. 3 minutes, please.
Okay, so I'm Rita Varel from Channing Avenue, and thank you for letting me speak. You had Castellea come before you about a month ago, and there was quite a lively discussion regarding the issues. That was a scoping meeting, and my understanding is that all the public comments on the scoping meeting for the EIR are due on the 15th of this month. That's a Saturday. So I'm not sure if that's a legal date to end public comment. The other thing that is disturbing is I have heard from some of the people at Castellea that, according to Amy French, the additional documents will be submitted to Amy French on March 17th. Castellea, the people that are against the expansion at Castellea, indicated that they wrote a letter and were denied a 2-week extension, during which time they could review the documents that were submitted on 4/17. So I don't know where to go with this, but I thought that since I felt the meeting that you conducted the other day on Castellea, which was very emotionally charged among the people. You did a great job. You were very fair. And I guess I would ask you if there is anything that you as a body could do to make it so that the residents opposing the expansion at least had the opportunity to review the documents that are going to be submitted on the 17th, so that if any other issues come out which should be included in the EIR, they have the opportunity to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. As I'm sure you know, we can't comment on oral communications, but appreciate the comment. Any other oral communications tonight? Okay, then let's move on. Agenda, we're moving forward as published. Great, thanks. So move on to the director's report.
Great, thank you. Just a couple of announcements. First, the City Council and the Planning and Transportation Commission, you should have all received an email that we have a meeting scheduled for May 8th to have that meeting between the two bodies. There will be a meeting between the chair and vice chair and the mayor and vice mayor scheduled. We're shooting for sometime next week to help refine what that agenda will be. And when we have some information on that, I'll send an email to the rest of the commission so you have a sense for what that meeting will entail. Last night, the City Council directed staff and the Planning and Transportation Commission, along with the Finance Committee, to refine the recommendations related to the introduction of a paid parking program, paid parking in downtown Palo Alto, and to return with a phasing and implementation plan for the Council's consideration in the fall of 2017. We will begin this discussion with the Planning and Transportation Commission in May, and we hope to conclude with a final meeting in August. The agenda packet has a enhanced future agenda calendar in tab 1 in response to commissioner comments, and you'll also note on that agenda, that future agenda, that we've identified some tentative ad hoc subcommittee topics and some meeting dates. The commission may recall that we started a dialogue about how we would approach going through the different comprehensive plan elements, and so that's an ongoing conversation that we can continue to address probably after the joint planning commission and city council meeting. We can come back and revisit this subcommittee and see how that list is coming together. And The last item to report is that the accessory dwelling unit ordinance is going to go to the City Council for a first reading on April 17th. It's on the consent calendar, and we'll keep you posted on that particular project. And that concludes the director report.
Great, thank you. And just a suggestion, let me make sure this is appropriate, but if any of my fellow commissioners have suggestions for agenda topics for the joint meeting with the council, I think you could forward them to Assistant Director or to Jonathan or to Hillary, and we can bring those into the discussion. Okay. No study session items, so we'll move on to the first action item, which is a scoping meeting for the 250, 350 Sherman Avenue, two projects. So I believe we'll start with a staff presentation.
Hi, good evening. I'm Colette Chu, engineer with Public Works. We are here tonight to conduct a scoping meeting for the Public Safety Building and California Avenue parking garage projects. This is to allow the public to comment on the topics that the environmental impact report will explore. It's not working. Mouse? Oops. Let's go back. Oops.
You can right click on the mouse or use the scroll button too.
Okay. All right. Just quickly going over the scoping meeting format. My presentation will cover the project overview. Our environmental consultant sitting to my right here is Ray Pendrell from MIG, and he will present the California Environmental Quality Act process and the study topics for the draft EIR. Then we'll listen to public speakers who submitted a card and comment, issues to be studied for the EIR, and PTC members' comments. It's important to note that the scoping session is not intended as a forum for dialogue about the merits of the project alternatives, or the EIR conclusions. Staff is not prepared to answer questions on the project itself. We are here to receive input on what is to be studied in the EIR. So the project overview is the construction of a new public safety building and California Avenue parking garage in the California Avenue business districts on parking lots C6 and C7. Parking lot C6 is about 1.2 acres. Parking lot C7 is 1 acre. The PSB will be located on parking lot C6. The parking garage will be located on lot C7. The parking garage will be completed before the construction of the PSB begins. This is the project location off of California Avenue, parking lot C6 and C7. The site is bordered by Sherman Avenue, Park Boulevard, and Ash Streets. Alma is diagonally up on the map. El Camino Real is diagonally down. Some of the neighborhoods surrounding the site are Evergreen Park, Southgate, College Terrace, and Ventura. This is an enlarged view of the site, showing lot C6 to the right and lot C7 to the left. The site is on Sherman Avenue. You can see Park Boulevard, Birch Street, and Ash Street. Across the street to the bottom right is the county courthouse building, and on the bottom left is 385 Sherman, which is the Visa building. So the public safety building will house the police department, the 911 emergency dispatch center, emergency operations center, the Office of Emergency Services, and fire department administration. So the PSB is planned to be 3 stories tall, ranging in size from 45,500 square feet to about 50,000 square feet, over 2 levels of an operational basement and below-grade parking for the police department. There will be about 170 to 190 secure parking spaces below the building. And the CalAv parking garage is on lot C7. On April 3rd, recently, the parking garage options were presented to City Council. Council directed staff to begin design for a parking garage with 4 above ground levels and 2 basement levels without retail space. And we estimate there will be approximately 636 parking stalls in the new garage. The conceptual site plan here showing the PSB to the right here, between Park Boulevard and Birch Street, and the garage between Birch Street and Ash Street. Sherman Avenue is the entrance for both buildings. California Avenue is up to the top of the site, and Jacaranda Lane is between Sherman and California Avenue. This is an aerial view of the project showing the parking garage and the PSB building. And these are just massing models. They don't depict any final design concept yet. And also this is a view looking down Birch Street from California Avenue. Also this is for massing only, and the view doesn't depict actual garage design. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ray from MIG to go over the EIR process.
Good evening. My name is Ray Pendro from MIG, and we'll be preparing the environmental impact report. And the remaining slides are an introduction to CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, and the EIR. Is it just press that? Or scroll it? There we go. And as Colette mentioned, we're taking notes tonight because we're interested in your and the public's ideas on what should be included in the EIR. CEQA is a state law. There's plenty of guidance on how to write an EIR, but of course, every EIR is a local product of the local jurisdiction and of the community's interests as well. So the EIR has not been written. That will be available in the summer, and there will be a 45-day review period and other public meetings to discuss the content of that once it's written and available to the public. These are some of the key thresholds or points in the EIR process. We've completed an initial study. It's on file at the State Clearinghouse in Sacramento. Copies of it are on the back table attached to the staff report and also online. The initial study is a checklist that goes through the CEQA required topics and gives summary or introductory information about each of those topics up to this point before the real deep analysis is begun. The notice of preparation goes with the initial study. It just says we're beginning to write an EIR. Tonight's the scoping meeting. The draft EIR will, as I mentioned, have a 45-day review period in the summer and at least one public hearing. And then there will be a final EIR where we will answer in writing all comments received on the draft EIR, and that will be a separate document so that each person that comments on the draft EIR that's released in the summer will have a written response for their comments. I'm going backwards again. Okay. These are the required contents of an EIR. Detailed description of project, that will be chapter 3. Potential impacts to the physical environment. We have to write down the physical environment because that's the limits of CEQA. I know the public and the commission and others could be interested in many other topics that will be important to the decision-making on this project. But the CEQA law limits the discussion in that EIR to physical impacts, changes on the environment. If we find physical impacts, the EIR will suggest mitigation measures, they're called, to avoid, reduce, or compensate for those significant impacts. There are other chapters in the EIR that summarize and cover different topics, but they're all related to physical impacts on the environment. A chapter called Alternatives will discuss in not as much detail as the actual project, but different alternatives that you might consider or the city might consider in making a decision on this project, like a smaller project, fewer parking spaces, things like that, just to catalyze some public thought and decision making. Okay, the initial study has identified these topics for the focus of the EIR. There will be a separate chapter in the EIR named for each of these topics. And this is a good guide for tonight, since this is a scoping meeting, that if you do have comments about what should be in the EIR, choosing one of these topics will help organize the information that we put in the EIR if you relay which item you're interested in. There will be separate technical studies by technical engineers and firms on these topics. There is a separate chapter on air pollution, a separate chapter in the EIR on GHGs. The arborist report goes in the biology chapter. The geotechnical report is in a chapter called soils and geology. Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental site assessments are in a chapter called hazards. Noise analysis has its own chapter. Traffic has its own chapter. And tribal cultural resource evaluation, this is related especially to a new law that went into effect less than 2 years ago called AB 52. And that will have its own section in the EIR. To decide if an impact is significant, we compare the physical effect on the environment with standards from the city general plan, your municipal code, and other regulations that apply to the site. Another set of regulations, for example, might be the Air Quality Management District thresholds for air pollution. I will eventually get those slides correct now that I have about 2 more. So this is what we will do tonight. The public has until April 24th, I hope that's not a Saturday, to submit written comments and to send them to Amy, either email or in the mail. All comments must be received by April 24th, and those comments will be sent to us and discussed with Amy about where they belong in which chapters of the EIR. And here's the timeline. And there are many opportunities for public input on the project within this timeline. There will be more than one architectural review board meeting on the project. As I mentioned, the draft EIR will be released this summer. 45-day review period after that's released. The final EIR is intended to be certified in December. That's after we respond to all the public comments. And then these are construction dates, estimates, which would occur, of course, after the EIR if it is certified. It's also important to note that an EIR is certified separately from approving a project. The EIR only, the council would decide if the EIR has the accurate and enough information in it to help you with your decision. The EIR does not promote the project or even say if it should be adopted. Next steps, as I mentioned, several architectural reviews of the project. We are preparing the draft EIR now, or the project description. And these are other steps that will be taken during this process between now and December. That's the end of the presentation, and I'm going to move this back just to show topics that might help people organize their comments tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, staff. I just want to acknowledge that I've arrived. I apologize for being late. We have one speaker card. I would like to invite that individual up now. Rita Verbal, you will have 5 minutes to speak. If anybody wants to comment on this item and hasn't filled out a speaker card, please do so.
Thank you again. I'm amazed that there are so few people here, given the impact that this project is going to have on the residents of California Avenue, particularly those people that are living in the condominiums that are right down the street. I understand that underparking office space continues to be a huge problem. This was mentioned when this topic came before the City Council. Examples given were the Visa Building, the Olive Garden project, and also there used to be a law firm on the corner of, I think it's Park and where you go into the condominiums, that is also underparked. So I guess people know that I attend meetings, and so they'll ask me to say things for them, but in actuality it would be better if everybody showed up and said their own concerns. I'm glad that the comment period is April 24th. Hopefully some people will read about this in the paper and make their concerns known. I was at the City Council meeting when this was discussed, and Bob Moss, who I think you probably all know, made the comment that he thought the EIR report should have been submitted prior to the City Council discussing how many stories above or below the ground the parking garage should be, given that there is concern about groundwater extraction and a toxic plume that may or may not impact the building. I believe Mr. Moss indicated yesterday that he felt the toxic plume would not be a problem, but that certainly should be considered in the EIR report. At the council meeting, many people were concerned about just the sheer mass of this parking garage, and it's easy to understand why the merchants would like maximum parking, particularly since the office building projects, which are flourishing in that area, are consistently being underparked. I hope that since the City Council saw basically a concrete box with no definition, that you will do your best to guide an attractive garage that doesn't loom above the rest of the cityscape for the next 100 years. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I will open it up to the Commission to give commissioners an opportunity to identify any areas that the Planning Department should study in addition to the ones that they've already identified. Okay, why don't I begin on my right with Commissioner Gardias, and then we'll just go down the line.
Sure. So thanks very much for your report and coming and spending time with us. There's number of some observations they have, and you, when in your opening statement, you just made it clear that certain issues are off the table. But and I noted that, but I think that things needs to be said where we are where we are. So I think that there is because there is no precise plan of California Avenue neighborhood. So this this project of the parking garage is just it's not embedded in the larger thinking of this area. And I can tell you a couple of arguments why I think it's not. So, before I say so, you may understand that pretty much have we had opportunity, or the PTC had opportunity to pretty much act in a larger purview and just consider this, the precise plan of this area, probably things maybe happened in a different order. So, for example, when you look at those two lots, there isn't that many empty lots in Palo Alto. So those two lots offer some opportunity. So the question is, what are we going to do with this opportunity? And we decided, City Council just decided to go with the public safety building, and also with the needed garage. And I totally agree that both those constituencies, they have their needs, and we need to support them. But the question is how we may support them. And so one possibility is that to consider underground structure for parking garages. But then there is something that's what's on the ground. That's a different set of opportunity, because cars may be parked underground, but then what's on ground gives us opportunity for example, housing development. Once we filled up those lots with the garages, then pretty much this opportunity would be lost. And I just want to, for the record, I just want to note that. There is also an item that is off the table, and I totally understand it again. Is pretty much there's an aspect of how those garages would be built. So there is always an opportunity of just having economically sound development, and maybe entrust certain development to P3 partnerships, as opposed to fund it with the public money, and then just pretty much leave our constituents with the question. Is the money that's collected from the taxation or from some other revenue, is it directed to the right need? Have this parking being funded with the private public partnership? That would be a different story, because there would be a true economic benefit behind the reason to build the structure. And this would look totally different. The management of the parking, there would be no funding that would be at stake here. So I just wanted to note those two aspects, that certain opportunity may be lost for those that are interested with more housing in Palo Alto. I think they should take a notice of those. There's also another aspect which I think you can just put under the section of greenhouse gas emissions. Is that pretty much that this is the pedestrian-oriented neighborhood district, and what we are doing with building, with directing spending toward the large parking structure, we are maybe automatically underfunding some opportunity to get to this district by different forms of transportation. And then some other opportunities is just to pretty much is to allow the neighbors from the eastern part of Palo Alto to either bike or to walk to California Avenue. As you may know, there's only one access to California. That's from the North California side. But then from the other adjacent neighborhoods, you pretty much have to either just go to North California. You cannot come to the other adjacent areas diagonally, because there are no connectors. And if I can remind you, when we talk about cross-town connector along Matadero Creek, then we were discussing here at this commission opportunity to cross Alma somewhere around this area. So that's I just wanted to mention this, that pretty much we are that there should be to generate revenue for the merchants. We may find some other means to access California, not necessarily allowing number of the vehicle travels by pretty much designing this huge structure. So saying this, the impact would be on the greenhouse gas emission. That's how I see it. So those are my comments for now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. The merchants were certainly persuasive on the size of this parking lot that they want there, and they were persuasive to council. But somewhat similar to your last comment, effectively the goal here is to bring more traffic into the California Avenue area. So I think we have to be realistic about that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't study the impacts, which we certainly should. But it does seem like a one-off kind of solution, at least in this demarcation here of let's just bring more people in so that they can shop and eat and park them there and then move them out. So it's kind of a yin-yang. So I'm sure there will be big impacts, and you're studying those, and they're checked the box. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that. I think generally you've checked the boxes that are appropriate in a way that, as I went through all of them, looked pretty good to the limits of my own knowledge. One comment that I'd want to make is that at the bottom of page 4, you comment on landscaping that there will be a partial replacement of trees removed from the existing lots on site, and then plant landscape for both sides. Also note street level roof deck of the PSB basement garage will be landscaped, which is a nice touch. However, when we get over to page 7, where I think this fits is in aesthetics, and I think it's aesthetics B, maybe, you have no impact on damaging scenic resources, including but not limited to trees, etc. So that seems to be an omission, so that it's going to be more than no impact. At the least, it maybe should say less than significant impact on your check boxes there.
I know I'm not supposed to answer questions, but this might help.
I think you can.
There's a similar question under biological resources about tree ordinance, so on, and that's where we introduce that topic.
Okay.
So you're correct, and that is a topic of discussion.
I looked at both, and I thought it fit in aesthetics, but
okay.
that's fine, because we're taking out trees, so we should be looking. And then the third thing that is related to my third comment, which is second one related to aesthetics, is that this is a big building. This is a very big building. So to the extent that you could be even more aggressive about landscaping around it where appropriate relative to the architecture, so that it doesn't become, I'm not suggesting it will, but so that it doesn't become an isolated eyesore because of its huge size and mass. Last night at council, there was that discussion about the Hamilton garage right near here. Again, 5 stories, where most buildings around it are 2 really, and a post office that's 1.5 stories. So the aesthetics of that, I think, are really important for us to take into consideration on the EIR. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with my colleagues' comments. I think it's good news that we finally found a track to start the PSB work after, 17 years of discussion. So that's good news. I would generally echo the view, and I'll use the word, it's lamentable that we need this parking. I think better planning in the district could have avoided getting us here, but here we are. We do need the parking in the district, so I guess let's get on with it in some fashion. Two requests for the EIR scope. One is under Category 10 land use. If possible, let's take one final look whether ground floor retail is more consistent with land use in the district. I know that the council has expressed views on that, but I think it's consistent with the EIR scope to take one last look at that and at least study and report out on it. Under the Category 16 of traffic, it would be great if there's some way to include construction parking impact. We're looking at least 5 years of construction and lost parking for the duration of the project. This could be very negative to the adjacent neighborhoods, and we need some analysis that can help lead us to a mitigation plan. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I would very much appreciate if we can include that in some fashion. Thank you.
So I've got a few areas that I wanted to go over, and I might be jumping around a little bit, so apologies in advance. With regard to the parking that you're citing, 636 total estimated, does that account for the 310 that is being displaced? Or are we just only giving comments and I'm not able to ask questions?
Yeah, so kind of like what we did with Castellea, we're here to mostly receive comments,
right.
But if there's some clarification items that are relatively easy to address, we're happy to answer that. And the 637, I think, does include the displaced parking spaces.
So it's
really an additional...
It's a net gain of 300 and plus.
And then can you explain a little bit about what's happening with Jacaranda and the egress and ingress of the emergency vehicles and how that's going to work?
I can tell you that I'm not with the architecture firm designing the project. So I'm writing the EIR, meaning I will be asking the same questions to analyze them in the EIR.
Okay,
so I can't answer that.
All right, then I'll try to just request that these things be looked at. That would be one of them, because I was concerned about the location of the plazas that I'm seeing listed and whether or not emergency vehicles are going to be going through where there is a location of a plaza. There's supposed to be a public plaza on both properties, from what I see. Also, with regard to the parking totals and that plaza, or sorry, rather on referring to the garage at 350. There's also supposed to be a retail component. So in the EIR, we'd want to see what that would encompass and how that would impact the number of parking.
So just a clarification on that. I think we heard from the council when this went to yesterday, I guess it was, or 2 weeks ago.
Is that coming out?
Month. It's all a bit of a blur, but so the retail component is not something that we're pursuing with respect to the parking garage, at least as we understand the direction from council at this time.
Thank you for the update. Wanted to request a study be conducted on the 135-foot communications tower, what impact that will have visibly and also with any other safety concerns that that would need to be addressed. Also looking at the safety of the public plazas, which I had mentioned in regards to that Jacaranda Road. I'm also concerned about displacing 150 spaces during the construction. Is there a feasibility of a remote parking, something that's an option we can look into with a shuttle service? Because it's a highly congested area and those lots are full every day and parking is really difficult. So what are we doing to mitigate the demand for parking while we're doing the construction? I didn't see anything in that regard on the EIR. I don't know if that's within the scope of the EIR or not.
Usually not, but it's definitely part of the project design process because those phases of construction have to be scheduled appropriately. So that information would be available. The details may not show up in the EIR but it'll be part of the project plans.
Okay, and then also with the issue that was brought up with regard to displacement of the groundwater and going down 1 or 2 levels, obviously that's going to be studied in detail. Is there a possibility to study having a larger garage that goes underneath Birch Street so that it's one large structure? Is that something that could be studied in the EIR as opposed to 2 separate structures? And then maybe can just go down 1 level instead of 2. I don't know if that would be a solution in any capacity, but I think Los Gatos, for example, has a larger underground area and it doesn't go as deep.
Yeah, I think we can take that comment and see if that fits into one of the alternatives. I do think there's a reason why we're not doing that, and it has something to do with the secure parking underneath the PSB. And
That's what I figured.
Yeah, keeping those separated.
You want to keep it separated.
But
I'm sure there's ways to keep it separated, but I understand.
Yeah, and so we can take a look at that, and if there's...
Well, at least utilize some of Birch Street as opposed to just the area immediately below, and if that's part of the EIR.
Great.
Also, with regard to the entry and exit points, I understand that the project at 3, the PSB has 2 entry and exit points, yet this humongous parking structure has 1, and they're both coming out onto Sherman Avenue. I don't know if the EIR could look at any way to mitigate the backup that cars would have entering the garage and also waiting and causing environmental degradation by having their cars running, waiting to exit, because if there's only 1 exit for several hundred cars, they would be sitting there idling, I would imagine. So if there's a possibility to just study whether or not 2 exits would be more beneficial from the garage. Currently, there's about a dozen ways to get in and out of the parking at 350. So that's just something I was thinking about. And also just to help with the general traffic flow. I don't know if this is within the scope of the EIR, but would you study any sort of impact in regards to having parking allocated for the electrical vehicles and bicycles and things like that, and if that would have any sort of mitigating factors on the building itself? Okay. I think that's all that I have. Thank you.
The brief comment I can make is there will be city standards if they're having the project supply electrical vehicle parking and so on. Those will be described in the EIR as standards applied by the city.
Okay, thank you. I actually thought of one last thing, and it was on the transportation component, which is on page 47, the levels of service, and I think that might fall under that, and with the egress and ingress of the 1 driveway. And also just looking at page 48 of our report, I was concerned, it's also referenced when in your photo of Birch Street, because the bicycle traffic is directed onto Birch Street. That is a very crucial, or sorry, not Birch, on Park. So I would hope that the EIR makes sure to study what's going on with the bicycle lanes and the safety component that's related.
The traffic chapter will have sections on pedestrian and bicycle
Yeah, it was just kind of vague in here, so I didn't know how detailed, but I'm assuming it'll get pretty detailed. So thank you.
So thank you to everyone tonight, and also a member of the public who spoke. In general, I think you ticked off a lot of the boxes that had concerns for me. There's a couple specific ones I think could be added. That is one on 1B, aesthetics. It says no impact to substantially damaged scenic resources, including but not limited to trees, rocks, outcroppings, and historic buildings with state scenic highway. To me, I think just these are such big buildings for the area, and to me a scenic resource is the sky and the skyline and the trees. So I think you could check that one and look there. And with regards to 9B also, substantially deplete groundwater supplies, et cetera. I think that one could be added, and I think that would address some of the concerns of members of the community about groundwater depletion, not just because we're going to use it ever as well water, but the effect that we don't have a very clear understanding of the removal of such massive amounts of groundwater, especially at one time. So those two I think you could add, and then the other serious things for me, traffic, response time for the emergency vehicles, I think, has been addressed, which I was concerned about in this location because of the congestion that's been referenced by my colleagues. I also think it's kind of interesting, this is our PTOD, our pedestrian transportation oriented district, and putting a giant parking structure in it does seem inconsistent, but I understand that's what the city council wanted. So, and you know, we've never had a plan for the California area that was accepted. So I think it would be good to have a larger plan for the whole area, for this and for everything else that we're planning on doing there, because so much is being planned, I'm putting into this one small area. And then I think there's going to be a lot of construction happening simultaneously in an area that is completely congested with very little parking available, especially during midday. So I was wondering if the other parking lots, existing parking lots and structures in the area could be optimized during this time, maybe with valet parking to help out, and that a very careful construction logistic plan would be formed, because having gone through 2 construction sites right around where I live in College Terrace, there's just no place for all the workers to put their cars, and these are big projects, and that area will not be able to absorb them. So, yes, those are my comments from now. Thank you.
Yeah, again, thank you for coming. And I think everyone's covered everything, so I'll just underline a couple of things in the interest of time. I think the community will be generally concerned with traffic and aesthetics, although clearly the entire scope of the EIR will probably come under, you know, someone's comments, so in particular treatment of groundwater, et cetera. But if the purpose of this meeting is for us to give feedback on elements of the EIR that we'd like to see paid special attention to, or items that you hadn't included, I'd say that really understanding how this project is going to be phased will be important. So you're going to lose 150 spaces while you build the first parking lot, after which the public safety building will be built. So it'll be some period of time where there's a negative 150 space impact or some impact. And so, as several colleagues mentioned, having a plan in place or having the EIR reference what will be done in the meantime, because the area really is filled to capacity, I think will alleviate a lot of the fears of the neighborhood, or perhaps there's nothing that can be done, in which case the neighborhood will be rightfully indignant. The second area is to understand the aesthetics in a way that I'm not sure, well, maybe you can answer this question. At the time of the drafting the EIR, how much of the aesthetics will actually be known? So at that point, what is the stage of architectural renderings that you can give beyond the massing of what is currently in the packages?
I know that the design will have gone through more than one architectural review submittal.
Okay.
And there will be right, and so the CEQA document will have graphics, illustrations, and visual simulations of before and after of the project design up to that point of how many architectural review meetings they've been through.
Okay.
So it won't be as simplistic as tonight's slide.
Okay, that's great. So that was so the areas where, you know, to the extent that you're going to put more weight than on other comparable EIRs, I would emphasize Commissioner Monk's request for understanding the staging and the intermediate period for what happens when we go down 150 spaces, and Commissioner Suma's concern of the massing basically of the sky, and understanding that from different vantage points in a way that perhaps might not be as extensive as you would do for a comparable EIR. But those are the two areas. They've already been brought up, but those are the ones that I would sort of double underline and say this area really needs to be fleshed out for the community to feel like they have had a full hearing. Thank you. That's all for me.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. I think you've heard.
So if we can, sorry, Chair, to interrupt, but I'm going to ask Albert maybe to just clarify a point so that have clarity as to what we're looking at with respect to the aesthetics discussion in the EIR.
So the EIR is not going to be focused on the aesthetics of the building itself. It's going to be about its impact on the aesthetic environment. So that's, that's issues like view or, scenic resources. Or it could also, the one place where the building does come more into play is things like light and reflection. But it's not really a document that looks at the architectural design in the way that we might otherwise.
Yeah,
I understand it's not an architectural review.
That's correct.
I think that Commissioner Suma made the key point, which is basically how does it change our perception? So the environmental impact are things that you mentioned, so including blocking the view of the vista or the sky, glare, reflection. That would be the impact that we would be assessing in the environmental impact report. Is that correct? It's not really judging the quality of the architecture of the building.
correct.
But I would say that the architecture of the building affects things like, will there be a glare? Will it be perceived as massive, or will it be perceived as blending in, that sort of thing. So to the extent that can be available, just having sat through many public comments, to the extent that the purpose of all of this is to say, can we anticipate what the public will be concerned about in an EIR? And so how can you predict that and make sure that you've answered this to the extent possible? I'd say more that kind of shows the impact of the actual building itself on the surrounding environment from an aesthetic and from really the comment came out several times, it's a massive building. What is it going to look like relative to its surroundings? What will its impact be on your views and on the glare and on the perception of the environment?
You've introduced one of the most interesting topics in CEQA. Aesthetics is the most subjective chapter in any EIR, and that's why we read the questions carefully on the checklist so that, as I mentioned earlier, the EIR is an attempt to give you information without promoting the project. So you're correct, it's not an architectural critique, but there will be illustrations, visual simulations, and for this topic, it's just the way it is that some people will like or will not like, but the EIR won't answer or change their opinion on some of those details.
Just really quickly, thank you for that clarification. I was also thinking about the people, even A here, it says substantially adverse effect on scenic vista. So when we think about the pretty tall apartment building that's already there, I think about those people looking out their windows. And I didn't mean the aesthetics of the building at all. I wouldn't expect that CEQA would look into that. But I do think A and B could be checked to look into, and I think then especially people who live in that area and have lunch outside in that area and stuff, would feel better about our environmental review.
Okay, sure. Commissioner Gardias.
Thank you. Just one more comment. This is, of course, highly judgmental topic, but also there will be impact on the look and feel of California itself, right? And then this slide that's included here that shows perspective of I think it's a Bird Street, where the parking would be adjacent to the white building that's on the east side of Birch. It was on, yes, exactly. This is the three-story building. It provides a good excuse for the parking, but then in reality, California Avenue up to Birch, it's pretty much one story. And although there were some buildings toward the closer to Mollystone that are larger and in mass, it's still one-story neighborhood. So pretty much that has many penetrations because there are some alleys that cut through the buildings. So when you have the 3-story parking garage right behind the facades of those buildings, pretty much the way that you experience California would be totally different. Because it will just change the way that you feel. Right today, it's just, that's why we all like California, because it's as opposed to the downtown, it's more secluded, it's more secret. Right, it's used to be Mayfield, right? So it's against Palo Alto, right? Those are the guys that drink, right, and just do different things, right? And we know that, right? And so it has a charm, right? So now with this massive structure, we're gonna change this neighborhood. So those are concerns from the aesthetics perspective. Thank you.
Okay. I've sort of thought a lot about how to ask this question. I've heard in presentations in the recent past about the impact a parking garage can have on a retail area, especially one that occupies like a whole block, in separating retail stores from other retail stores, essentially interrupting the opportunity for pedestrians to continue to walk along, I guess, a retail, a retail assortment of retail locations. I'm wondering, I know that Council has directed, has given direction to sort of put aside the retail component of this project. I understand that from the meeting this week. I'm just curious if, and this is coming off the amount of time we've spent evaluating the enforcement of sort of ground floor retail across the entire city. So my question is there a category inside of this EIR where you think it's possible to evaluate the impact that the garage will have on, I'm not sure if you would call it walkability or somehow alienation of the retail area adjacent to it from the retail area behind it, or what could eventually be a retail, because right now we essentially have a pedestrian-oriented district and we have an ordinance that essentially encourages ground floor retail, and I'm curious how the properties around it will, further develop if, in fact, they do develop.
Here's one way to look at it. Make the retail one of the alternatives in the EIR alternatives chapter. And then there is a section in the EIR on land use policy and programs that the city's adopted, or like you mentioned, there's an ordinance, so that the project's consistency with city policies and ordinances is a topic in CEQA. So if you put the retail alternative, it would be like chapter 20. There was one of the bullet points in the slide. If that were one of the alternatives, then the comparison would have that option compared with downtown policies.
Yeah.
And that issue would arise within that context.
That's exactly I had a conversation just yesterday, and that was one of the solutions that was suggested, and I think I would like to see that. And this isn't an effort essentially to push back on council direction. It's just I would like us in the CIR process to be able to evaluate these options. I would like council primarily to be able to see what the pros and cons are for the various benefits. You get more parking, or you potentially have an interconnected retail district. And I think those are two important considerations. Okay, I think I'm going to, before I pass it on to Commissioner Gardis, I want to suggest I think this is going to be a very interesting EIR. I think, I think I am particularly interested in seeing how the groundwater situation is going to be evaluated, because it's not clear to me yet that we've had sort of a final conclusion on what happens when you pump out so much groundwater. I don't know that you'll be able to arrive at that conclusion and with, certainty, but I think it will inform sort of the greater debate in Palo Alto because of the size of the project. So I do think that that will probably be one of the most highly focused areas from members of the public, even if they're not particularly concerned about this project, just in general, your findings as they relate to pumping all over. Okay, why don't you make your last final comment, and then I'll close the session.
Yeah, this is just very quick, just for the record. In the section of alternatives, which of course I know that there will be, that we already just pinpoint those two lots as the development for those two services. I was just always wondering why there was no allocation on Park Avenue considered for the security building. That's pretty much, it's empty lot. That is pretty much between, I'm just looking at them up, just give me a moment. That is between Sheridan and parking garage on Sherman. That's an empty area that has very easy access to it's over Oregon Expressway, but has very easy access to the to Oregon and better egress for the police cars. So I would just, for the record, I would like to note that there is an empty lot in that area that could have been utilized for the police station. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'm going to suggest that we move on to agenda item number 3. Thank you very much. Why don't we take a 2-minute break, give staff a chance to swap seats, and if anybody needs to go to the bathroom.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. I'm joined by Meg Monroe, a consultant working with our department. She's been invaluable in helping us handle some of these additional projects that we throw at her, including sort of tracking these regional developments that are taking place outside of the Palo Alto boundaries. We recently had a conversation with the council on another matter that involved a comment letter to another jurisdiction. And the council had asked that where there was not an opportunity for a major development project to be reviewed by the city council at its regular meetings, that we at least run it by the Planning and Transportation Commission to look at the letters and have a general understanding of what the projects were and review the comment letters that we're preparing. These comment letters are intended to memorialize the city's interest, where regional projects may have an impact on our streets or park resources or any number of matters that you had just considered on that last item, the checklist issues. We try to highlight those, and we recognize that we work with other jurisdictions, review our documents, and we try to maintain a respectful and professional relationship with these other jurisdictions. But we do want to highlight areas where we may have some areas of interest, and we note those in the staff report so that their consultants could explore those and evaluate that further. And so we're presenting these two letters. One has to do with the Bayshore Precise Plan in Mountain View, and a project-specific item in Menlo Park. And Meg has coordinated with a number of other city departments to review these draft documents and has come up with what we think are the critical issues that we think need to be addressed, or at least further studied or highlighted. And so we're presenting that to you to look at. Is the tone right? Did we highlight what you believe to be possibly the key issues? Understanding, of course, that you probably have not had the time to delve into the detail as Meg has, but just from a gut check, does this seem like we're heading in the right direction? And so that's the purpose here. And if you have any specific edits or questions about sentence structure or grammar, we're happy to take those comments offline if you want to give those to us. But if there's any specific questions about the letters, Meg can help us guide us through that discussion. Thank you. So at this point, we'll just take any questions that you may have regarding the letters.
Okay. Well, thank you for your hard work on this. This is a interesting and sort of unique endeavor. During our pre-commission meeting, I inquired about whether we've received letters like this before, and we haven't in the memorable past. But I think the fact that we're preparing them sort of speaks to our level of engagement. So it's I'm excited to review this. So why don't we, if you don't mind, start on the other end?
Sure. And if I could just preface any comments that you have, if you want to speak to which letter you're referring to, if there's a specific comment.
Yeah, I think it's okay to do both at the same time. They're interlinked in the sense that it's a project within the area of amendment, right?
Given your earlier scoping meeting, this is the next step in the environmental process. And the Menlo Park letter is interesting because they did a program EIR on their plan, and now they're doing a project within the scope of that and have identified certain focused areas that exceed what they're expected in their program EIR. The North Bayshore Precise Plan one is a program EIR, looking at a broader project.
Okay, please.
Great. Thanks for, again, I think this is great. And obviously, we're not an island, so it's good to see the projects that take place to the north and the south and what they might do. So a couple of, well, first, very small issue. Jonathan Late's email and name are misspelled in the Mountain View letter, so you get the wrong email. So that should just be fixed.
That's how I avoid getting more emails.
That's how you avoid getting more. I thought it was part of your clever scheme.
Gee, shucks.
So I didn't remind that.
Caught, Jonathan.
I think this is the case in both, but I think that both of their studies focus on LOS instead of VMT. And so I think we should emphasize that we'd like to see VMT as a primary indicator. I don't necessarily object to LOS standards, but I think it does lead to sprawl. The best way to improve LOS is to make roads wider, people sparser. And in the case of the Mountain View project in particular, this is critical. Mountain View is building a huge number of units. And, to the extent that they can densify and make this a place that does not require single occupancy vehicles, that would be favorable. So we should get them to adopt a VMT standard. And that should be what they do anyway. That's according to their own, that should be, California-wide now. But certainly it would be favorable for Mountain View to do so.
Well, we could request them to do so.
Yes. They're using, so this refers to Mountain View. They seem to be using a parking ratio that's inconsistent. So they are using 1.2 parking spaces per unit as their standard. And this also relates to the earlier comment. The use of LOS, the use of a large parking ratio creates more sprawl and I think is antithetical to the goals of the project. If you look at the North Bayshore guidelines, it seems to come out with a recommendation of 0.6 weighted average, meaning if you look at their micro apartment units, single units, et cetera, and take the weighted average, you should come out with something like 0.6, so approximately half of the parking ratio they're currently using. So as input, I would say the city should look at more closely at the parking ratios they're using and see if it's consistent with the way Palo Alto would approach such a project. They're also assuming a very high SOV rate for those who are not working in North Bayshore. And I think they assume that 73% of people will not be working in North Bayshore, and that 77% of those will be driving alone. And so again, to the extent that Mountain View planning can try to increase the one ratio, which is the percentage of people working locally, and I don't know how that's done. I don't know if it's leaning on Google to subsidize units but it seems odd that you have a huge housing complex being built in the middle of Google's campus. And yet the assumption is that only 1/5 of the units will be taken up by Googlers or people working locally. I think if I just look at the average city block in Mountain View, it seems like it's more than 1/5 Googlers. So it's a bit odd that you're putting a micro unit focused apartment compound in the middle of their campus. And if they really do think it's about that ratio, then something is off. To the extent possible, we want something like this to reduce our traffic load. You want to get people off the road that are driving to these campuses and have them live locally. And I guess I would pose this as a question. What planning levers are available? Because certainly as a Palo Alto resident, I would prefer that it not just be more people driving on 101 coming from this giant new compound. If it is the case that this giant new compound or series of these neighborhoods are adding people who are just biking to work at Google, I'm very much in favor of that. I think that would be a wonderful outcome for both the people working and living in that area, but also for us and our traffic conditions. Are there tools available, or is this under consideration? So as a Palo Alto resident, the thing we are concerned about is the traffic impact on our community. And so to the extent that they can increase the ratio of people working in Bayshore, the better for us, and really the better for them. So my question is, are there planning tools available, or is this something that can be addressed?
Well, it's obviously a local, it's a local decision. It's a Mountain View decision. Mm-hmm. They talk about a TDM program. Yep. They do not define that program. So yep. I think that what we could do in our comments is to suggest that in their TDM program, they look at how to, at methods mm-hmm. by which you get people to live and work in the same place.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't give them a program or force them into a program.
Right. Yeah. And I see that seems to be the intent of the plan. You know, when it's skewed towards very small units, you're looking for rental units of people that would mm-hmm. move closer to their work. So they are, but then the assumption that they use in terms of what proportion of them would actually be working locally is inconsistent. You see what I'm saying? Either
Yeah, I
it seems
understand
like
what
the
you're
plan
saying.
is that,
Yeah.
but then the numbers they use for their traffic calculators are that 73% of people will be working outside of North Bay Shore. And so I think I would call into question that they should have a goal to have a greater percentage working locally.
Okay.
On the Menlo Park submission, I'm in full agreement with the staff letter. I think that it's excellent. In particular, you've called out around the TDM and traffic reduction measures, and you've specifically asked about the status of a proposed bicycle and pedestrian underpass. And I think that is perfect. Putting in the kind of development that they are putting in, having an underpass at that point would be great for the traffic situation. I'm not sure if this is something, or if this is appropriate for us as a city to comment upon, whether Stanford should be asked to foot a portion of that bill and make it happen, or the city's letter just simply says, are you accounting for the space that would be needed for this? I want my understanding, based on asking people in Menlo Park, is this really going to happen, is that they do want Stanford to help support their construction of an underpass.
So is your question how the underpass would be funded?
Yeah.
Well, I guess we can ask that question. How's the underpass?
Yeah, is this actually going to happen? And so your letter asks, is space being allocated for it? And what I would ask is it going to be done? Is this already in the works? Is it budgeted? Is it going to be done? And is the space being provided for it?
In addition to space, how's it going to be funded?
Yeah. And the concern, as you probably was the intent of this section of the letter, is that at that point around on abutting Caltrain, in order to get there, even if you live in the neighborhood, you'd have to drive all the way around. And so it would make everyone living nearby actually get into a car, and actually having a better pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure goes right there, would, just like we have with the VA hospital, I think would be, or with PAMF, would be very helpful. But anyway, the letter for Menlo Park, I had no real comments. I thought I was fully aligned with all the points.
Yes, we can thank Jared for the traffic work there. He's very good. He's sitting here.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So, yes, thank you for the letters, and I'm going to start with the easier one, which is Menlo Park, and I agree that it seemed mostly to ask about the things we'd be interested in. I will say that I do worry about the constant, and I've said this before, so I hate to be a broken record, but the constant sort of theory that Caltrain has an endless capacity. It's at capacity now. Electrification and its future are really up in the air. The shared, the blended system with high-speed rail would have effects, and I just think it's hard to rely on that, and we need a lot more comprehensive TDM measures. And I'm concerned about those 4 curb cuts in a row on El Camino and the traffic impacts. And I think it's interesting to ask if Stanford could be part of the funding for the underpass, which takes me to a similar situation. Is I think the Google contribution to the bridge could be expanded, or maybe the city of Mountain View would have an interest in sharing in some of the funding of the bridge at Adobe Creek. So that's my segue to the Mountain View project.
So let me make a note of that. So the bridge over Google Assist?
Yeah. If it was reasonable for Palo Alto to pursue a larger Google contribution to the bridge funding and or a city of Mountain View participation. And then with such a massive project, I once again, I think that even more so, obviously, because of the size of the project and because there's so few services in the Bayshore area, I really worry about how it's going to work out in the end, and if Commissioner Rosenblum brings up a good point, are really 73% of the people going to drive off of the campus? It was my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong about this, that Google owns the land. So they have a lot of control.
They have a presence there. I don't know that they own all the land.
Okay, but they own a lot of land.
And the idea was that each of these 3 neighborhoods they were going to create would be self-sustaining in the sense they'd have their own retail, they'd build their little villages, so to speak.
Yeah, that's great, but people are still going to have cars to take their families and kids to other services,
Clearly.
and it's not served by transit in any way that I can see. And it may take a long time to ramp up and have a really healthy community feel there in terms of the retail services. So I wouldn't want people to feel isolated on kind of a halfway built kind of new town. I was also very concerned about the potential impacts on our open spaces and parks and trails from that project and our precious resources in the Baylands, but just on the recreational facilities and parks and trails. I suppose this is probably a bit of a twee thing to say, but if they're really going to be 15-story buildings, and maybe this is not something CEQA can mitigate, but I think that is a major part of the western flyway for migrating birds, and I'm just not sure. I'm not sure how fully CEQA can address that, but I did want to mention it because I think it's a very important resource. And yeah, I think one of the things that should be considered really is, as part of a TDM measure, there should be a healthy private bus and comprehensive bus service required for this area.
In fact, they are planning one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
That was included. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for putting the letters together.
Sure.
I think without having the benefit of reviewing either of the EIRs, I'm sure they reference everything that's important, so I'm happy to see that these were done. In just generally comparing the two, as far as tone goes, I think the first one is a little bit more straightforward. You identify an area issue, and you give them a plan of action at the end of each paragraph. I'm not seeing that as much in the Mountain View letter, and I know you have a couple more days on the Mountain View letter, so that might be something you can finesse a little bit. And going back to the letter that's, I believe, due tomorrow, which is the Menlo Park letter.
Yes.
I wasn't quite clear on number 6 on the first page and what you're asking, if anything, and that has to do with the percentages with the trips.
I'm sorry.
So, if you're looking at the first page on the Menlo letter, if there's an ask that you have.
Trip distribution. Can Jared address that? It's his item. Jared? Yeah. Can you point that one? Yeah, sure. It's number. You have a letter? Yeah.
Jared Mullen with the Transportation Division. So that was in reference to the trip distribution, basically where the traffic engineers or planners think all of the car vehicle trips will go to. Generally, is it going north, south, east, west? And the comment was we were a little surprised because they only assumed 7% of all vehicle trips headed to the south, whereas many of our destinations in downtown Palo Alto, which is very close to this project, you get more like 35% of vehicle trips are headed to or from the South Bay, like San Jose area. So we felt 7% was really low, and that can affect how many vehicle trips go through intersections in the city of Palo Alto, because you can really only approach this site from the south by using the Palo Alto street network. So we could potentially revise the comment to ask them to check or provide additional models or assumptions they use.
Yeah, maybe you could put a footnote in about that 35% that you referenced here, or just something to give it a little bit more context, so they'll know what you want them to do as a result of that finding.
Okay.
If that helps, I don't know.
Nope, sounds good.
And then there isn't really a definition for the transportation division. I'm assuming that's the Palo Alto Transportation Division, because the letter's coming from the city of Palo Alto, so that is reference might be more of a...
Palo Alto, sure.
Strike that.
And then just also going back now to the Mountain View letter. Is this listed in any particular order of priority area?
No.
And if not, you might want to put the higher level priority areas towards the front of the letter. To me, there's areas that look a little bit more important than others.
No, they're...
or are you referencing
but typically
it
you just do them in the order that they were in the report.
Okay.
So if you want to move the transportation things up, I could take the block and move it up.
Yeah, I don't know that when they read the letter, they're going to actually note that it's corresponding to the EIR. If it's very obvious.
It makes no difference. If you'd rather you want to put the transportation things first?
I think that's
probably the biggest issue.
I think that's the biggest issue.
Right. Sure, no problem.
I don't know what avigation is, but I'm sure that's a word.
Avigation is indeed a word. And my spell checker hates it.
And yeah, just to review it to maybe tighten up a little bit and make a clear ask at the end of each section.
Sure, can do that.
I think, and then at noise and vibration section.
Yes.
Which is page 2 of your letter. It says more study is needed at the end of that.
Yes.
You might want to clarify what you're looking for. I noticed in the previous letter that we used please a lot, and we want to be very conciliatory and friendly with our neighbors, and if there's a way to soften the request,
to say
to the extent you can, and just be consistent with it.
In this case,
it doesn't read in a harsh tone in any way.
Right. So I can make it clear what we need for a study.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Just a clarification on the Mountain View project. Is this intended to be a Google company town project, or is it intended to be available to the general public?
It's intended to be available to the general public, as I understand it. But Google is a major presence in this area.
Right. Yeah, and so just given that in Silicon Valley people tend to stay in jobs for 3 years or switch jobs every 3 years, it's probably not unreasonable to assume that over the life of the project that there will be more commuting, unless we or that there will be commuting as they show here, unless we believe that people will just move move when they change jobs, which tends to not be the pattern people follow. So I think we should just be careful in how we think about that.
This is referring to the 70.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that it may turn out to be more plausible than it looks on the surface. I mean, at inception, it may be lower, and then later it may go up just because people are shifting jobs. And this is just something that's hard to plan for. Anyway, that's the only comment that I have.
Yeah, generally in these kinds of studies, they look at typical similar areas for the trip generation. I mean, it influences them. So we can ask that they do that they confirm
I mean, it feels like Redwood Shores and Foster City might be the most comparable. I don't know what you've looked at as comps, but those feel somewhat similar in character.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, thanks for your hard work. Just one quick process issue. I just feel a little bit disappointed it's coming to us so late, and that therefore you have to stay up all night
That's
to get
all
our
right.
comments in by
My
morning,
job.
but when this has to get into the mail or hand delivered or whatever. So it's a little frustrating. I felt sort of semi-defeated. Plus,
I'm sorry about that.
I couldn't spend all the time that I wanted to on digging into those EIRs with the few days that we got it. But taking the direction, I would like to make a couple comments. First of all, if we ever needed any evidence, I don't think we do, but if we ever needed any evidence that all these issues are regional they are
Yes,
regional.
you're
which
right.
Which is what this tells us, time and time and time again. Those 10,000 people that are going to live in those, or 10,000 units, more people than that are going to live out there, are not all going to have lunch on Castro Street in Mountain View. So we're going to be, hosting them in our town. So that traffic is coming our direction. So I think the tone, which is one of your questions, I think is and should be actually quite different for the two. I think the Menlo Park one is very well done. You itemized the number one point. I won't go into what my colleagues have said on that. It's very straightforward. Footnote, aesthetically, that's going to be an improvement to put new buildings up there. So I think that's inevitable and manageable. I think on the tone relative to the Menlo Park letter, I don't want to overreact, but I'd almost say that our tone should be a little bit almost alarming because of some of these impacts that are going to hit us.
For Menlo Park or for Mountain View?
For Mountain View, excuse me. Yeah, I misspoke. Thank you. And I don't want to be non-conciliatory, as Commissioner Monk suggests we should be conciliatory, but I think we've got some real impacts here. So to the extent that we can get nice, friendly cooperation to look at these issues and perhaps mitigate some very specifically, I think would be very appropriate. You run through a bunch of them, which are right on point. I mean, we've got airport safety here. We've got birds that are going to be crashing into buildings out in the Baylands. The noise and vibration is absolutely true. It's not always bad. But I can hear those concerts in Professorville some nights, and sometimes I think that's good because I'm getting free admission. But I think that's just very well researched and a good point. And the gridlock is the gridlock. I mean, it's already gridlock many times when you're out there in the shoreline area. That's going to be there. The transit service, again, it's been brought up. Caltrain is Caltrain. It is what it is, and it's very limited right now. So I would not be shy about saying, really, we need some help here. Work with us on some of these areas that you've itemized. And thanks for your efforts in getting this into the deadlines that you need to meet.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that my colleagues exhausted all the interesting comments. I can only say two things, that definitely there is impact on us. And looking at the recent, pointing at the recent approval by ARB of the, I believe, 5-story hotel that happened a couple of days ago, it's in the context, it's by San Antonio roads, so it's in the context of San Antonio, and we have Mountain View on the other side of south side of San Antonio, which impacts us considerably. Pretty much, it changes our perception of this where we are. So I think that this will be development. This significant development will add to the change along 101 corridor. When you go toward, when you leave Palo Alto and when you're passing Menlo Park, there are already very tall buildings on the east side of 101. So it just puts under unbelievable pressure on Palo Alto in general. And then one minor technical comment. I think that in terms of the vehicle miles traveled, I think that we are in the period of the acceptance. So not all municipalities maybe accepted vehicle miles traveled.
Oh, the vehicle miles. Oh, yes.
It's and we ourselves, when we had a discussion, we decided just to have I think 2 years period during which we will be reporting on the vehicle miles traveled as well as the level of service. So I think that that it's fair, of course, to ask them about VMT along with LOS, which would be along our standard.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay, a lot of firsts this calendar year. This is the first time in my tenure that we've had a chance to present a letter like this to a neighboring city. I think that I agree with Commissioner Monk. I think the tone of the letter is positive and appropriate. Particularly for the Mountain View letter, I wonder if there's a place in our communication where we could articulate a I don't know, a respect for the effort to accommodate so much housing in the Bay Area. Something like we are, and I don't know that I can speak for us all, but this is an impressive effort to provide infill housing in a community that struggles so tremendously with providing housing, considering the shortage. And despite this, we'd like you to consider some of these concerns that we have. Particularly because this is the one. Our neighbors are making a huge effort to. And this is a plan amendment. So in some parts, this is the city sort of creating an opportunity to address the housing shortage. And I think, at least from my perspective, we should acknowledge that tremendous effort.
Do that.
Yeah. I just want to acknowledge. I thought the same thing about the 70, the number of unit, the percentage. And there was this moment where I thought maybe the Google buses were going to transport individuals to San Francisco, they were going to bring people in, but they would also take people out, and there would be this amazing network of get to work, transportation, and.
In the document, they talk about adding a bus fleet of 45 to 75 buses a day.
To accommodate the residents.
To accommodate.
Who are traveling in all directions.
Yeah. And these were buses, I think, principally by companies in the area. So I think Google brings a lot of people in and out now.
Right. No, I know that.
Yeah.
And
so they expect that to expand.
Yeah. No, I was wondering if if Google's got a bus coming at 8 a.m. from San Francisco. And then it makes.
Does it go back?
It goes back to San Francisco,
right.
Maybe to pick up people at 9 a.m. or what. I wondered if the return trip would be an opportunity for residents to travel.
Oh,
you see what I'm saying?
Good question.
We had a comment about sort of the lack of public transportation, and I imagine I'm not the first person to think that there's an opportunity to fill those seats on their way out.
Non-Google people.
Yeah. I imagine those buses are parked at Google overnight. I mean, they might even be running 24 hours a day for all I know. But essentially, those are opportunities. Those are seats. And I wonder if there's a connection there. Okay. Does anybody else have any other comments they'd like to share?
Can I make one quick question?
Sure. Commissioner Suma.
Just a quick question. On the last page of the Mountain View letter, it's talking about the bridge, and it says, however, it's noted that this and other overpass bridges should be designed to later accommodate extension of light rail. Is our bridge being designed to do that? Our bridge over Adobe Creek?
I don't think
I've never heard that.
I've
never heard that.
The city's bridge over Adobe Creek that is currently under design is not being designed for light rail, so we may need to, I think we need to clarify that comment, and thank you for bringing it to our attention. I have an idea of what it may be referring to in the EIR for North Bay Shore. There was some consideration of building a bridge over Stevens Creek between the North Bay Shore area, and kind of the Moffett Field area. Stevens Creek is that kind of boundary between North Bay Shore and Moffett Field, and then light rail does go into Moffett Field area. So you could conceivably build a light rail connection over there, and there was discussions of building a bridge there for buses in the past. So maybe we mixed up our creek crossings in the comment letter, but the City of Palo Alto Bridge at Adobe Creek is a bicycle and pedestrian.
That's what I thought.
bridge.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Okay, I want to thank you both for being here tonight and for assisting us, and especially to Meg. This is a tremendous effort, and I hope we didn't take up too much of your time tonight so you can get back to sort of completing the letter.
No.
But it's been a pleasure working with you. Okay, that concludes agenda item 3. I want to just address the in our sort of conclusion of our meeting. I want to address that we have on page 6 a tentative future agenda has been added to our packet. I think in response to some of the comments we made last meeting, and why don't we take this time? Do we have minutes to approve? Do we have minutes to approve? No. Okay, so why don't we quickly take this time? Are there any committee items? I should be more specific. Do you have anything to report from your participation?
We haven't met since the last meeting.
Okay, and are there any commissioner comments, questions, or announcements?
I would just comment very briefly that I attended the council meeting last night, and this item on downtown parking management is extremely well organized by the consultant and well received. And as Jonathan said, we have direction now to work on that. That's going to be a big item and fun to work on. It'll be very constructive.
Great, thank you. Is there anything else? Okay. Then I will adjourn this meeting at 7:47 p.m. Thank you.